The Buccaneers have a top 5 quarterback in the NFL, at least according to one of the most elite players in the league. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Friday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarko at JYarko_Bucs, credentialed member of the media, covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. No ads, no hashtags, nothing like that. Just text conversations with me. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We remember an absolute legend, and Rachaad White joins the Rich Eisen Show. That's all coming up in a little bit, but let's start with Baker Mayfield being a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. Excuse me. So Tyreek Hill was doing a live video, and one of the viewers asked him his top 5 quarterbacks. Tyreek Hill said, quote, Mahomes, Tua, Lamar, Dak, and Baker Mayfield, end quote. That's an interesting list, to say the least, and I'm not going to lie. Although I think Baker Mayfield is far better than a lot of people give him credit for, I'm not sure he's top 5 in the league. With all due respect to Tyreek, I think his list is just not very good. How are you going to rattle off the top 5 quarterbacks in the league and first off, have Dak Prescott on the list at all? But more importantly, how are you going to leave off Joe Burrow or Josh Allen? For that matter, Jalen Hurts could be up there. Jared Goff could be up there. You could certainly make an argument for Brock Purdy, given his success. And while a lot of people are going to point to the help around him and the playmakers on that offense, I still think he has a stronger claim than Dak Prescott does. I know Tyreek has to show love to his current quarterback, but Tua in the top 5 is also pretty questionable. Patrick is number 1. There's no doubt about that in my mind. But Burrow and Allen have to be the rest of the top 3. Then you can have a conversation about Lamar, Jalen Hurts, Jared Goff, Tua Tagovailoa, Matthew Stafford, or Aaron Rodgers could be up there if they're healthy. Stroud could be in that conversation in the next couple of years if he continues playing the way he did as a rookie and improving on that. There's a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL that could round out that top 5. Now, I think Baker Mayfield is certainly on the cusp of being top 10, especially if he improves over last season. And it'll be hard to continue to ignore him if he can have back-to-back seasons with those kinds of numbers like he had last year. However, with all of that said, I think it's worth discussing that Tyreek even put Baker Mayfield in that conversation, that Baker was one of those guys that immediately came to his mind when someone asked him about his top 5. And the way that kind of echoed what Mike Evans said at his press conference following his contract extension, that he believed Baker Mayfield was elite. Tyreek could also be thinking about more than just on-field performance. There's personalities, there's leadership, there's trust, there's belief in your quarterback that all play into it. It's more than just stat lines. There's a lot that goes into it, and that's why you see some of these wide receivers bouncing around and moving teams when they are, towards the top of the league in that position group. They don't get along with their quarterback, or they feel that they don't have the right chemistry with their quarterback. There's more than just arm strength and vision that plays into a top 5. So when he's rattling off his top 5, it could be more of a list of guys he would like to play with rather than a true ranking of which quarterbacks Tyreek Hill actually believes are the best. Maybe he didn't list Burrow or Josh Allen because of the rivalries against their teams that have been forged over his time with the Kansas City Chiefs or Miami Dolphins. Allen, for that matter, could have been left off because he's still a division rival and he wanted to shine a light on Tua and not mention the Dolphins, top competition in the AFC East. But if Baker Mayfield wants to be talked about in the same breath as those other quarterbacks, he has to find a way to improve his stats and get the Bucs deeper into the playoffs. Yes, of course, you can point to Dak Prescott's postseason failures and say that Baker has gotten as far in the playoffs as Prescott's Cowboys have. That's 100% true. It's absolutely accurate and fair. Lamar has made it to a conference championship, and he did it with far less talent around him than what Baker had in Cleveland or what he had last year or this year in Tampa. That's why Lamar is a two-time MVP. Tua, sure, he's only been to one playoff game, and the Dolphins got smoked by 20 points. But again, Tyreek is going to hype up the guy in charge of getting him the ball. Going down the list from last season, Baker was 9th in yards, 7th in touchdowns, 20th in passing success rate, 12th in quarterback rating, tied for 4th in game-winning drives, 19th in completion percentage, and tied with the 7th most interceptions. So he's on the cusp of being an overall top 10 quarterback in the league, but he needs a couple of little improvements to really get over that hump. That said, it's really nice to see some of the outsiders talking about him as being one of the better quarterbacks in the league instead of people like me regurgitating it over and over to those of you that listen or watch and already believe that Baker Mayfield is underappreciated and overlooked in the landscape of NFL quarterbacks. And I'm just going to throw this out there. It's probably nothing, but thought it might be worth noting that the Miami Dolphins have a potential out after this season. So if they don't want to be on the hook for $34 million and $56 million against the salary cap in 2025 and 2026, Tyreek Hill could become a free agent after the season, and maybe he would want to play with one of his top 5 quarterbacks. Going to jump into the live chat real quick as we are live here on YouTube. Paul, a.k.a. Florida Dream House, haven't seen you in a little while, buddy. But he says, I trust what Tyreek says in evaluating a QB before 99% of the clowns on social media. I 100% agree with you there. I will trust the opinion of an NFL wide receiver as to who he thinks the best quarterbacks are compared to just people on social media who want to hate because they hate or they have their own biases or agendas or whatever the case may be, which is why I felt it was worth talking about that Tyreek Hill put Baker Mayfield in that group. And then Paul goes on to call me or tells me not to be a hater with a bunch of laugh emojis. We have Joe in the chat saying, you're not putting Derek Carr in the top 10 conversation? Absolutely not. And we'll have the divisional previews for the network coming up in a little bit. And I absolutely will die on the hill that Baker Mayfield is the best quarterback in the NFC South. I'm sure I will get pushback from Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints and probably Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons. I'm not really sure where Julian Council of Locked On Panthers is going to fall in that conversation. He'll probably take the Kirk Cousins side over the Baker Mayfield side, but we'll see what he has to say. And then Hefty Laces says, I'd rather listen to the opinion of an elite wide receiver than pundits who've never touched the field. And while I do fall into the latter category, Hefty, I will agree with you that, again, I think Tyreek Hill's rating of quarterbacks is going to weigh a little bit heavier than mine or anybody else on this network or, the Stephen A. Smiths or the Skip Baylesses of the world. This is a guy that views football through a different lens than those of us do. And when he's going to throw Baker's name out there, again, it's worth mentioning because he is Tyreek Hill and he is arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL today. He's definitely the most electric wide receiver in the NFL today. There are still a couple of wide receivers I might take over Tyreek. You have Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, but Tyreek Hill is a human cheat code. He is a mismatch nightmare, and his opinion is worth discussing. Rachaad White looks to take a big step in 2024. That is next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights. I've gotten brakes and rotors for both my cars, and I'm currently shopping for something for a car that I plan on getting in the next couple of months. But whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. It makes the shopping experience stress-free. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every single day. Everydayers, make sure you are coming back on Monday. We are back to 5 days a week starting July 5th. What is that? The 15th? It is. July 15th, we're back to 5 days a week leading up to training camp. And then boom, we have football to talk about. The preseason starts in less than a month. Then the regular season will be here before you know it. In the meantime, if you want to hear the latest news from around all sports, NBA and NHL free agency reactions, NFL news, you have the Olympics starting up, you have the WNBA, you have the MLB, but you want to hear more than just the national narratives and the biggest stories without fake manufactured screaming, make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without the screaming. Locked On Sports today is streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Rachaad White was on the Rich Eisen Show and was talking about his role and expectations for the upcoming season. And it shouldn't surprise anyone that his sights are set high, not only for himself, but for the team as a whole, especially when it comes to the running game. Rachaad told Eisen, quote, "Obviously, my goal is I'm trying to do whatever I can to help the team win. We've been last or 25th to last in the past 5 years or 6 years or so, even with the Super Bowl when it came to rushing. Tampa Bay has been down bad. So my goal, what I expect me to do is to turn that around and us to be top 10, top 15, top 12 at minimum. Then there has not been a 1,000-yard rusher in like 9 years. And obviously I was 10 yards short of that last year. So I'm going to make sure I'm not short of that this year and go well over that 1,000 yards. And then the scrimmage yards are just going to speak for themselves," end quote. So how far were the Buccaneers from that top 15 mark last season? The Buccaneers finished with 88.8 rushing yards per game, which was dead last. The 15th ranked team was the Green Bay Packers at 112.1. That's a difference of 23.3 rushing yards per game. In total, that was 396 yards less. In yards per carry, the Bucs again finished dead last with 3.4. The 15th ranked team was the Tennessee Titans at 4.2 yards per carry, so 0.8 yards behind that mark. What about rushing touchdowns? The Buccaneers had 8, which was 29th in the league. The 15th ranked teams were the Falcons, the Cowboys, and the Commanders with 14. So 6 fewer total rushing touchdowns there. What about individuals, though? What about Rachaad White by himself at the running back position? Well, he had the 14th most rushing yards among running backs last season with 990. So he's already in the top 15 there. Touchdowns, he was tied for 11th with 6, 2 behind. The team as a whole was 2 behind 15th place. Tied for second in attempts with Christian McCaffrey at 272. He was 22nd in first downs with 46. That was 5 behind 15th place, which was a tie between Saquon Barkley and Najee Harris. Total yards, Rachaad White was tied with Amon-Ra St. Brown at 7th with 1,539. Among running backs, he was 4th. Yards per game, he was 15th with 90.5. Among running backs, that was 8th. The moral of the story is simple. Rachaad White cannot do this alone. Chase Edmonds has to be better and has to stay healthy. Bucky Irving has to be a solid and consistent contributor. Rachaad White alone cannot pull the Buccaneers rushing game out of the cellar of NFL rankings. As an individual, Rachaad was one of the best in the league outside of touchdowns, where he finished 11th, but he was easily a top 10 running back across the board last year. 3 more rushing touchdowns from him would have put him just outside of the top 5. I talked about it throughout the entire process that the Bucs absolutely had to address running back because last year it was essentially a one-man show. Edmonds did a little when he was available, but the pressure to improve the run game lies with the revamped interior offensive line and Bucky Irving providing relief. As much as I talk about what a great job Jason Licht has done during his tenure with the Buccaneers as the general manager, he's always had trouble bringing in running backs in the draft. Now, Rachaad White looks to be panning out just fine, but go back to the other running backs that Licht has drafted. Ronald Jones, one season wonder. Keyshawn Vaughn, ineffective, and Keyshawn gone. Charles Sims, absolutely worthless. Jeremy McNichols, terrible. Sean Tucker as an undrafted free agent, the jury is still out, but it doesn't look promising. Since the year 2000, we're talking about almost a quarter century of Buccaneers football. They have 5 seasons with a player hitting that 1,000-yard mark. In 2000, Warwick Dunn rushed for 1,133. In 2005, it was Cadillac Williams with 1,178 yards. 2010, it was LeGarrette Blount with 1,007. Then Doug Martin in 2012 with 1,454. Then again in 2015 with 1,402. Since 2015, Rachaad White has the most rushing yards in a season with that 990 that he had last year. It cannot fall all on his shoulders. So we're going to all be keeping a close eye on Bucky Irving this year to see if he can get the Bucs back on track and make sure that Rachaad White isn't having to do this all by himself. Because if he does, we're talking likely about another season where the Buccaneers finish last in the league in rushing. It is no longer a league where one running back, outside of the exception of Christian McCaffrey, can be the guy to carry your team in the run game. It takes a stable of running backs. At the bare minimum, it takes 2. So is Chase Edmonds going to step up, or is Bucky Irving going to be the one to step up and really provide the second part of a 1-2 punch? Going to jump into the live chat again and see what you guys are saying. Scotty J says Bucky Irving better learn to pass block or he's the third teamer. That's certainly an area where really all rookies tend to struggle because the difference between the college game and the NFL game is that most college running backs are not asked to block and pick up blitzes in the passing game. So we'll see how that goes in his development. Definitely going to keep an eye on that throughout training camp and, of course, in the preseason. And once we get closer to the preseason, as I do every year, I'm going to tell you guys some of the things to watch out for, because although a lot of football fans consider the preseason to be useless or pointless, there are certain things to look for when you're watching a preseason game. No, the final score doesn't matter, but there are going to be certain aspects of the game that it'll be really important for people to keep an eye on as the Bucs get closer and closer to narrowing down their roster to 53, and then, of course, getting into the regular season. We got Hefty in the chat again. The additions of Barton and Bucky should take the rushing attack to new heights. Rachaad will eat this year. Take him in every fantasy draft. I hope that you're right on the first part with Barton and Bucky taking the rushing attack up a few notches. But I absolutely agree in the second part. If you can snag Rachaad in the third or fourth round, you're getting a steal. We know he's going to be heavily involved in the run game, but he's also still going to be heavily involved in the passing game. If you're in a PPR or a half-point PPR league, make sure that you're getting those shares of Rachaad White in your drafts. Some very sad news regarding a legend in the game of football and a member of the Buccaneers Ring of Honor. That is next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Wrapping things up here on today's episode of the Locked On Bucs podcast, live on YouTube. Thank you to all that are participating in the live chat. I appreciate each and every one of you. And you'll notice I'm not as hype as I normally am heading into the final segment of this show. And that's because Monte Kiffin, the longtime defensive coordinator for the Buccaneers and an innovator in the game of football, passed away on Thursday at the age of 84. Kiffin was a key part of the Buccaneers becoming a formidable contender in the late 90s and early 2000s with his Tampa 2 defense alongside Tony Dungy, then alongside John Gruden. His defense produced some of the greatest players in the history of football at their positions: Derrick Brooks, Warren Sapp, John Lynch, Rondé Barber. Without Monte Kiffin, the Bucs don't win Super Bowl 37. And it was in that game where his defense suffocated the league's #1 offense that many deemed unstoppable and set Super Bowl records for takeaways and defensive touchdowns. Over his 13 years with the Bucs, Kiffin saw 8 different members of his defense combine for 36 Pro Bowls, 6 first-team All-Pros, and 2 different Defensive Player of the Year recipients. The Glazer family issued a statement saying, quote, "Monte Kiffin was a beloved and iconic member of the Buccaneers family, and our entire organization mourns his loss today. As a coach, Monte was a true innovator who got the best out of his players and helped create one of the signature defenses of the early 2000s. His passionate and energetic leadership style resonated with all his players, and he was instrumental in our first Super Bowl win and the success of Hall of Famers such as Warren Sapp, Derrick Brooks, John Lynch, and Rondé Barber. Off the field, Monte was kind, genuine, gracious, and always had a positive attitude. He was very special to the Buccaneers organization and our family. We send our heartfelt condolences to his wife, Robin, son, Lane, daughter, Heidi, and the entire Kiffin family." Kiffin was inducted into the Buccaneers Ring of Honor in 2021, surrounded by his gold jacket-clad defenders and other members of the Super Bowl 37 team. Also, over his 13 years in Tampa, Kiffin's defense was consistently among the best in the NFL, ranking in the top 10 in yards allowed 11 times and in points allowed 12 times. Tampa Bay's defense led the league in points allowed per game, 17.5, ranked second in takeaways, 293, and yards allowed per game, 286.8, third in interceptions, 249, and 10th in total sacks, 503, all while under Kiffin. Some point to the collapse of the 2008 Buccaneers team as happening because Kiffin was leaving and joining his son Lane at the University of Tennessee, where they spent 1 year before leaving to go to USC. Then, of course, Monte Kiffin had another short stint in the NFL with the Dallas Cowboys, but has spent the last 4 years with his son Lane at Ole Miss as a defensive analyst. Monte Kiffin wasn't just one of the best coaches in the NFL over the years, but he was a true pioneer and innovator during his time He was also one of the most genuinely nice people you could ever hope to speak with. John Lynch told Rick Stroud of the Tampa Bay Times, quote, "I love that man and am so indebted to him. Monty had a unique enthusiasm for life, football, and family. He also had a passion for coaching and helping people like myself become the best version of themselves. He was a great listener. He listened to all his players. He knew you played best when you got involved in the game early. So he always tried to blitz me in every first series of the game. He was a funny man as well, and he loved people. I'll miss that man." Tony Dungy added, quote, "My first experience with Monty, I was on my 18th birthday. We were playing Nebraska, and they were number 3 or 4 in the country. Our starting quarterback got hurt. I started that game, and they crushed us. I learned about Monte Kiffin's defense firsthand. That was my 18th birthday present. When I got the call to come to Tampa as head coach, he was in New Orleans. I thought, man, it would have been fun to have him. I'm going to talk to Jim Mora," and Jim let him come. And I was able to say, "Monty, you run the defense and I can concentrate on just being the head coach." It was not just his smarts, it was his passion and care for his players. Everybody got the sense that we were a unit. He loved the game. He loved everything about it. He loved the staff meetings, the players, just everything about it. And you couldn't help but feed off that energy. Everybody thought we had turned up the projector speed just because of how fast we played. Rondé Barber also took to Twitter to say, quote, "The man stood tall behind us all. True greatness personified." So we're going to end this episode by sending our well wishes, thoughts, and prayers to the Kiffin family, and to send them a thank you for all Monty did for the game of football, for the Buccaneers, and for all the lives he touched along the way. That's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Bucs. Again, thank you to all that joined in on the live chat. Please make sure you are subscribed on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Check out everything that I'm doing over at BucsNation.com. Follow on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at JYarko_Bucs, and become a Locked On Bucs insider by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.